How to deliver for a country of 1.4 billion? As China continues to hone its governance skills, what can other developing countries take away from its success stories and lessons? While China does not seek to export its systems, more and more governments seem keen to learn from the country's experience, especially from developing countries. Considering that China and Africa together account for 1/3 of the world's population, how significant is our partnership in sharing leadership training and capacity building programs? I was pleased to be joined in Shanghai by Busani Nkaweni, Principal of the National School of Government and Senior Research Associate at the University of Johannesburg. I want to start with a topic that's not so much talked about, which is capacity building. And during the September summit of this year on the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation, Chinese President Xi Jinping proposed something which is very important for developing countries. He talked about a partnership action for mutual learning among civilizations. Specifically, China is ready to work with Africa to build a platform for governance experience sharing, a China-Africa knowledge network for development, and 25 centers on China and Africa studies. He also said China will make better use of Africa's leadership academies to cultivate talents for governance and invite 1,000 members of African political parties to China to deepen exchanges of experience in party and state governance. As principal of the National School of Government, that must be exciting news for you.
Oh yeah, definitely. It is exciting for me. And in fact, in South Africa, we have been engaging on exchanges like those ones with leaders at administrative level and at political level. We do it for South African public servants and also some in the continent as well. Just 2 weeks ago, I had a delegation of 50 students, senior leaders from government here in China. They spent about a month at Peking University at the International Poverty Center, where they were learning strategies on governing the economy as well as anti-poverty. So this takes our work into the next level, as it were. And it needs to be seen in context, because African economies and our own economy are going through a reform process. You will recall that in China in 1978, when we were going through the reform process, the leadership of China spent time studying economies and development models of other countries in Asia,
right.
Singapore, Japan, Korea. Out of that exposure, out of that experience, they were able to adapt some development strategies based on their own local conditions and local capacities. And so the Chinese economic success story can also be attributed to the mutual learning that took place during that period.
Well, some people say, look, China is led by the one big party, which is the Communist Party of China. There are other democratic parties, so-called democratic parties, but it's the CPC that has been leading China over the past decades. That is not replicable for the great majority of countries in the world. And yet, what can you take away specifically from the governance experience of China? Can you give an example, for instance?
Well, there will be many other more multi-party democracies that have gone through a similar path. But there are things that are consistent in the success stories of those countries and the People's Republic of China. The first one is having a very clear vision of what we want to achieve in the economy. That's the first thing. And second is to build the capacity to execute that vision, regardless of whether or not we're a one-party or a two-party or a 10-party state. That's what you require. Because without that capacity, you will not be able to execute your own vision. Thirdly is the ability to raise resources, to put resources onto your vision and the strategies that you have put in place. Regardless of any form of democracy, you do need to mobilize the resources. You also need to mobilize productive, productive forces, regardless of any form of a political system that you have. Because if you don't mobilize them, they will be idle, and will end up having economic instability. So there are things that are consistent from having a very clear vision, like in your case, a five-year vision, have very strong institutions, have got capacity to implement, mobilize, productive forces, mobilize capital, and deploy it effectively. That is a consistent ingredient for growth, regardless of any form of political system that's chosen.
Can you use one example or one tour which you have been on with your African or South African counterparts in China, which makes it clear to you the essence of the so-called China success in terms of governance?
Well, I've been to, too many, maybe one unlikely one for most people is that in June I visited, Dali, right? There is a lake there.
In southwestern China's Yunnan province.
Yeah, there is a lake there. At some point there were problems, ecological concerns, because they were farming, garlic, and some of the, pesticides and the chemicals they were using in the farming into garlic ended up in the lake, and it was affecting aquaculture in the lake in Dali. And through efforts of central government as well as local government, there was a response to help preserve the aquaculture in the Dali, lake, and you balance those concerns of rehabilitating the lake and balance those concerns with the concerns of the public, of the communities there, who earn a living by farming, by farming garlic. And through leadership efforts, we're able to balance those. So you don't completely displace farming communities who suddenly must depend on the state for their livelihood just because we are serving the lake. And so it is those ability to be scientific in how you deal with ecological concerns in the lake, but also be very practical in how you deal with the concerns of the communities whose livelihood has survived on the farming of certain agricultural products, which require them to use certain pesticides in order for them to have a higher yield. And so these people were able to change the type of crops that they are farming, and they're still farming them sustainable. At the same time, we are able to fix the problems that were being experienced at the lake. So that may look like very basic, but for the challenges that were there, is a freshwater, lake. It's an important part of heritage, of the country and of that region. We are able to strike a balance. If you are able to do that at that level, it's a sign that you can manage other more complex projects, such as the space program, building fast rail, and things like those. And that is a big test of the capacity to govern an economy by balancing those community needs, balancing the ecological concerns, at the same time boosting the livelihoods of communities.
So you must have been talking with and meeting local grassroots administrators, party members, cadres. What strikes you about them that makes the kind of delicate balance possible? And do you think in South Africa similar qualities are there and can be cultivated as well, especially after exchange?
Well, Dali is a great place. I'll go back there again, given a chance. I love the diversity, of the area, cultural and otherwise. In fact, I have a view that the quality of life of the people in Dali is better than the quality of life of people here in Shanghai.
Yeah.
I have a view because I went to the market, I interacted with the elderly there, very diverse, it's a very vibrant community. But specific to your question about the leadership and the
local cadres
and the local cadres, it's an important observation because it means they understood the mandate of the government of the day, and they had to interpret this mandate and implement it without there being severe consequences for the communities there. In Dali, I could see that these cadres, these people who work for government, they are working very closely. They are at one with the communities, and that is why it was possible, therefore, for that transformation to occur. It's an important lesson for us in Africa and those in the global south.
Is that why you're looking to China? I don't know whether you're having this kind of learning experience with other Western developed countries as well. Is that why this President Xi's proposal about sharing knowledge, sharing with Africa's leadership academies resonate with you, someone from the global south?
Well, it's a big thing in the global south right now to rebuild governance capacity, and there is a reason for it. That for a very long time, the dictates of the Washington consensus was that you needed a smaller government
yes.
and that you outsource most of the work to agencies and consulting firms. The net effect of that was the erosion of state capacity. And so now we have a weaker state that doesn't have the capacity to plan the economy and execute projects because that capacity is outside. And we know now that those countries that have followed that model have not been able to catch up in terms of growing their economies. If you work as a network of academies or schools of administration, we're able to share lessons. Myself in South Africa, I am working very closely with the National School of Administration in Ghana. We train all the way up to the leadership and the president of Zambia. We're doing the same with Ghana, doing the same with Kenya, including exchanging, students and leaders to spend time in South Africa and time in Mombasa. That is very important because, people in the civil service need to appreciate one thing. If I experience a problem today as a senior civil servant, I may think I'm the first to experience it, but only through exchange of knowledge and learning, I will find out that someone has resolved that problem elsewhere. I might then be able to resolve my problem much quicker. Our National Development Plan and the entire system of planning in South Africa has been shaped by us learning from Malaysia and learning from the People's Republic of China. And so we are able to make some significant leaps because there are these two countries in Asia who've experimented with those. They are ahead and we can adapt some of that model and implement it. It's the same as cars. China didn't make cars 8 years ago. Others were making cars. You've looked at how they are making cars. We've adapted. Now we are leading.
Yeah.
So the notion that we can learn from each other in terms of looking at development model is really, an anti-intellectual argument.